Welcome to the new Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski. I'll be your host today on this little adventure. In today's show, we're going to be talking about what a patriot's role is in our new cold civil war. There's going to be a little American history, because if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. But let me make it clear right up front, I do not want to see bloodshed. There is no reason for us to have bloodshed. And there's also no reason for patriots to give up their liberty to some global ideology just because we have some political bullies. So let's talk about this today on the new Book of Daniel podcast. Like I said, my name is Daniel Bobinski, and I'll be your host. But right up front, let me give a little shameless plug, because in addition here to doing 2 podcasts a week, I also run a business called Workplace Excellence. And I know a lot of folks want to support podcasts that they watch, and I don't have a Patreon account, and I don't have a button for supporting me. So if you want to support this podcast, I would very much appreciate that. And the best way to do that, really, is to have my company help your company. Go to myworkplaceexcellence.com. Take a look at what we offer there and see if we have something for you. I mean, we do team training, we do one-on-one training, one-on-one coaching, been doing it for 30 years. Self-management, work management, relationship management, emotional intelligence, it's all there. Got lots of references. Like I said, there's no donate button, but if you want to help us out, go to myworkplaceexcellence.com, see what you have, and if we can help you be more productive, more effective, more profitable, it's a win-win. Okay, let's jump into this discussion on what is a patriot's role in our cold civil war. Let me start with our American Revolution. Back then, we had Loyalists and Patriots. Patriots were the ones who believed in the principles that were famous and popular amongst the colonists, right? They're the ones that we believed in here, that we had developed over the centuries of being on this continent. Whereas England had their Loyalists who were living here in the colonies, and Loyalists wanted England to be in charge. Patriots wanted some principles that we had believed in to be established. Well, there was some tension there. And England was trying to bully their way across the colonies here, get their will done, such as the Stamp Act. They had just finished a war with France, and they wanted us to pay for it. So they put the Stamp Act and taxed us, and we didn't care for that. So we pushed back. That included the Townshend Act to enforce the tax payments. That took us to the Boston Massacre. People pushing back against the British soldiers, they get shot. That didn't end up well. Then British enforced the Tea Act. So now we have to pay a tax on tea. There was no Starbucks at the time. We weren't coffee drinkers yet. We were all tea drinkers, still under the British rule, right? So had to pay this tax on the tea for the East India Tea Company. Well, we didn't like that, so we had a bunch of people climb aboard the British ships and dump 46,000 tons of tea into Boston Harbor. That didn't make the British very happy, so they send more soldiers. They kick out our elected officials. They put military governors in place. They put soldiers in our homes. We have to house them and feed them. Didn't make the colonists very happy, so they meet together and have this first Continental Congress. And they talk about what to do, and they say, let's send a letter to King George. And they have this Declaration of Rights. Think about this for a second. Declaration of Rights, sending to King George, saying, we are entitled to life, liberty, and property, and we will never cede those rights to any foreign power. And basically, if you don't respect this, then there's going to be more trouble than you probably want. Well, King George did not respect it. He sends more soldiers. And that ends up with Lexington and Concord. We get 7 American dead, 73 British dead, which leads to the Second Continental Congress. We're trying to figure out, what are we going to do about this? In the meantime, the British bombard Maine and Virginia. They destroy some towns, buildings get burned down. And a few months later, our Second Continental Congress says, you know what, we're done. We're out of here. And they declare independence, because they had some principles in mind, some very specific principles that they believed in. One is that their rights came from God, not from the British crown, right? Rights come from God, not from government. that political power should come from the will of the governed, not from an elite. That our government should be a representative republic and not a democracy, because that leads to mob rule. That our government should only have limited power, and that citizens' rights can't be taken away by the government because citizens' rights come from God. So that was the principles upon which our founders created our Constitution. And our Constitution got then sent out to the states for ratification. And the states said, no, we don't like it because we're afraid you guys are going to have too much power. So they created the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights was really a bill of restrictions of what the federal government could not do, such as the freedom to exercise your right to bear arms shall not be infringed, right? You can't do this. Well, there's also then the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people. This is the 10th Amendment. In other words, if the Constitution doesn't say that the federal government can do something, then that is reserved for the states or for the people. And with this Bill of Rights, this Bill of Restrictions on the federal government, then the colonies said, yes, we approve. Okay, and remember that 10th Amendment. We're going to come back to that. All right, so we have this tension leading to a war because people weren't listening. And then we jump ahead 70 years to our Civil War. Well, that didn't just bubble up overnight either. I mean, we go back to 1820, they passed the Missouri Compromise, saying that no states below the 36th parallel would be free states. They don't be slave states below the 36th parallel. Guess what? Thomas Jefferson was still alive when that was passed. He was not happy about that particular law. He saw it as being very dangerous to the well-being of our country. But we ended up with more tension throughout the years. We had the Nat Turner Rebellion of 1831. We had Congress people running around trying to get laws passed to make all states free states, no slaves. Didn't get any traction. People were pushing for stuff. Compromise of 1850, Fugitive Slave Act, where California got admitted as a free state in exchange for the Fugitive Slave Act, which meant that if someone from the North came across a black person who was an escaped slave, they had to, by law, return that slave to its owner, participating in an institution for which they did not approve, right? So you have this tension, this building up. Uncle Tom's Cabin comes out, becomes the best-selling book of that century, right behind the Bible, and people's eyes are opened to the horror of slavery. And while I'm on it, just as a side note, if you ever hear somebody calling somebody else an Uncle Tom, chances are they didn't read the book. So if you want to know what I mean by that, go read the book, because Uncle Tom wasn't the kind of person that they're saying he was. Anyways, moving on. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. These states are going to decide for themselves. And we have skirmishes. People getting shot and killed trying to defend slavery or defend freedom of slavery. Dred Scott decision. Supreme Court says that slaves are property. We have some racists on the Supreme Court. What, the Supreme Court can pass laws that are weird like that? Yes, they can. So you have racists saying slaves are property. The South gets a little emboldened because the government's not supposed to be able to regulate property. And they start challenging these laws against slave states. Well, next thing you know, Lincoln's elected. We've got more skirmishes. We had Harper's Ferry, people getting killed. Lincoln gets elected, states start seceding. We have a then civil war after the attack on Fort Sumter. Listen, people have to listen, right? So anyways, jump ahead now another 70 years. We have our World War II. At the end of World War II, Winston Churchill goes to pay a visit to Joseph Stalin over in Moscow, and they basically divvy up Europe. Western countries and Eastern Bloc countries, Soviet bloc, and so now you have the East and the West, and a lot of 45 years of geopolitical tension on a Cold War. A lot of saber rattling going on. 46 proxy wars happen meaning other countries fighting each other with the United States back in one and Russia back in the other. Well, today, we're back 70 years later into a Cold War in our own country. We have, in revolutionary times, we have the Loyalists and the Patriots, right? Loyalists wanted our centralized government under England. And today we have Patriots and Globalists. Centralized government perhaps under the UN or whatever organization they're going to come up with. But the Patriots haven't changed. The Patriots still want those same principles that were established at the founding. Why would they call us conservatives? We want to conserve those principles. So there's something that Lincoln said that kind of resonates here as to what happened between the Cold War and our current Cold Civil War. Because Lincoln said that the philosophy of the classroom in one generation is the philosophy of the government in the next. Whether or not he really said that, we don't know, but it's attributed to him. But the principle is true. And in the 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev, he was the Soviet premier. He came out with a speech, pointed at the United States and said, "We're going to crush you without firing a shot." They purposely sent in people to the United States to infiltrate government and media and education and the arts and entertainment and even the church, to bring a socialist, Marxist mindset into our country, to collapse us from within. I think you could probably tell they've had some success because a lot of people support socialism now. Last poll I saw was 38% of people under the age of 35 want socialism. So what do socialists / Marxists want? I'll go back to Marxism for a second. He's totally against God. Marx believed that in order to win, you had to have class warfare. You had to pit one side against another, rich against the poor, right? That's what they had. And he believed that people who believed in God were useless because they wouldn't fight. They were content with what they had, because after all, Jesus says, Paul says, be content with what you have. Don't covet. Just be content with what you've got. Well, if you were a believer in that, you didn't have a need for class warfare. You were content with what you had, and that did not make Marx happy. He wanted that clash of the titans. He wanted the people fighting, right? So what do we have in today, our society? Started in the 50s and 60s and has not stopped. We had a great success with the civil rights movement in the 60s, and got rid of a whole bunch of bad stuff, but we still have people perpetuating the division, creating race wars, creating class wars as much as they could. Rich against the poor, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That phrase comes around. That, by the way, has proven itself false under Trump. The poor people have come up so much more. You have men against women. You have men against men. We have the toxic male thing going on with the metrosexual male. And we have all sorts of, as much division as they can find, they're going to create division. That's their goal, is tear us down, keep us fighting, and then they can try to rebuild the country into this Marxist philosophy. That's what they've tried to do. So try to take God out of the picture as much as possible. Marxists don't believe that rights come from God, because Marxists don't believe in God. They're atheists. Marx was an atheist. They believe that rights come from government. They don't believe that political power comes from the will of the governed. It comes from this elite bunch of all-knowing people who know better than we do. All those principles on which our country is founded, they don't believe in that. They think they know better than us how to live our lives. You know who's a good example of that? Mike Bloomberg, right? You cannot buy a soda more than 16 ounces because all that sugar is not good for you. There's the elite telling you how to live your life. And now Bloomberg's running for president. And he was during an interview last week, I think he said that we should put higher taxes on cigarettes and alcohol and things like that the poor buy. That's going to ruin their lives because they don't know how to take care of themselves. So we need to make it not affordable for them. This is a candidate for president. It doesn't sound like freedom to me. He's acting like Mr. Nanny, right? So Let's talk a little bit about the acceleration of this separation from our founding principles. Along comes Mr. Obama. And he starts off practicing the Hegelian dialectic they've been using now for decades, which is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We're going to, the elites are going to say, hey, we want this law, we want this change in our government. It's drastic. And the Patriots go, no, we're not doing that. And so the elites then say, well, then you need to compromise with us. We need to come to some middle ground. And so we give up some, we negotiate, right? Well, 6 months, a year, 2 years go by, and the elites will then come up with a new extended, let's do this. And it's more drastic than the first time. And of course, the Patriots say no. And then they say, well, then you need to compromise with us and negotiate. So then they negotiate and we meet halfway. This is the Hegelian dialectic. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Each time they're making a little bit of ground, which makes Khrushchev's prediction correct, right? They're just going to move in, move back, move in, move back until they keep gaining ground. So Obama started off practicing this 2 steps forward, 1 step back stuff with his stuff, but he got kind of cocky because we had this infiltration in the media and you could not criticize this guy. Anything that you said bad about him, suddenly you're a racist. Didn't matter if it was about principle or not. If you criticized Obama in any capacity, you were a racist. And that just shut people down because they didn't want to be called names. So Obama starts off his presidency being against gay marriage. And then 4 years later, now we're back positive. We're going to approve of gay marriage, LGBTQWERTY marriages. But you know what was weird? That was a stroke of the pen. They found their court case. They went up to the Supreme Court, and an oligarchy of 5 people decided that this was going to be the law in total violation of the 10th Amendment, because we had 16 states that said marriage was between a man and a woman. Remember the 10th Amendment? Power is not spelled out in the Constitution that give the federal government power are reserved for the states or for the people. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that LGBTQWERTY people can get married. That doesn't say it in there. Nothing about gay marriage or marriage at all in the Constitution. Doesn't even mention it. Marriage was started in the 1920s to keep blacks from marrying whites, or whites from marrying blacks, or whites from marrying Hispanics. That was a racist law. Why would the government shouldn't even be in marriage. So now we have gay marriage. 10th Amendment out the window. We have healthcare. Oh yes, we're not going to see what's in this law until we pass the law. Once we pass it, then we can see what's in it. What kind of asinine tripe is that? That does not fit with our founding principles. The consent of the governed, that is a elite telling us what we're going to have as laws. Then Obama gets a little crazy and says, all these public lands over here, well, the public can't go on those lands anymore. And with the stroke of a pen, because remember, Obama says, I have a phone and I have a pen. So a stroke of his pen, without public input, he makes millions of acres of public land off limits. We have places now where it's illegal to collect rainwater on your own property. We have places now where you cannot build a house on your property because part of your land gets marshy when it rains, and now it's a protected wetlands. We had the government saying, this is the food you're going to have in your school system. The federal government saying, this is the food you're going to have. We have the federal government saying, this is the standards you have to have in your school system. It's like a lot of top-down autocratic stuff, yeah? Elites using the courts because they couldn't get the consent of the governed, right? They found a way to bypass the consent of the governed principles. Basically, they're just attacking the principles that our country used to found in our founding. Let me talk about this cold civil war now as beyond me, because it's been talked about for a couple of years now. Claremont Institute publishes some writings from time to time. Angelo Codevilla penned an essay on the cold civil war. And I want to quote you just one paragraph from his essay. He said, During the Civil War, President Lincoln observed that all sides prayed to the same God. They revered, though in clashing ways, the same founders and principles. None doubted that those on the other side were responsible human beings. Today, none of that holds. Our ruling class and their clients broadly view biblical religion as the foundation of all that is wrong in the world. Whoa! The ruling class sees biblical religion as the foundation of all that is wrong with the world. Said another way, the elites have basically departed from the founding principles that our rights come from God. And if you think I'm just saying that, let's go to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, a bipartisan commission, 4 people appointed by the president, 2 by the Senate, 2 by the House. And the commissioner of that, the chair of that commission, in 2016 said the following. This guy's appointed by Obama. He said, quote, "The phrases religious liberty and religious freedom will stand for nothing except hypocrisy, so long as they remain code words for discrimination, intolerance, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, Christian supremacy, and any form of intolerance." Can you see what they're doing? They're painting anything having to do with Scripture and God and Jesus as bad. Religious liberty and religious freedom is hypocrisy. You know, I don't know. I read the Bible and I see Jesus as God come in the flesh. And when he's asked, what's the greatest commandment? He says, love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, strength, and soul. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. You know, nobody asked Jesus what the second greatest commandment was, just what's the greatest. So the second one must be pretty darn important. Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, what kind of love are we talking about? Same Greek word is love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it is not rude, it does not proud, it does not seek self. All those little things you hear at a wedding, right? 1 Corinthians 13. I don't see that being homophobic or sexist or racist or intolerant. This guy's talking about a different kind of Jesus than what I read in the Bible. The left basically believes that the state should be the authority of rights, the giver of rights, and they should be the final authority, that God should not be the final authority. So what's our comparisons? Well, you know, in the Civil War, we had skirmishes. In the Revolutionary War, we had skirmishes before the actual war broke out. It's a little dangerous here in our states right now. We've had skirmishes, right? In 2015, you had a Bernie supporter who was tweeting and posting on Facebook that it's time to destroy Trump and company. And then in 2017, this guy goes to Virginia and he shoots 5 Republican congressmen and staffers. They really try to paint Trump as a Nazi, right? You've heard that. Well, do you know what Nazi means? I'm sure you do, but maybe you can just share this with your socialist friends who think that Trump is a Nazi. That Nazi means National Socialist German Workers' Party. In other words, National Socialism. If you're a Nazi, you're for a National Socialism. Well, it just so happens that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, right? And a lot of his supporters are socialists. In fact, today, as I'm recording this podcast, Project Veritas just released some video of one of Bernie's campaign workers saying that they're going to burn down Milwaukee if Bernie doesn't get the nomination for president, and that they're going to send people to re-education camps once Bernie becomes president. Doesn't that kind of sound like a Nazi behavior to you? Does to me, because that's, well, you know, National Socialism and Bernie's a socialist. Go figure. Well, then they call Trump a fascist, right? You've heard that. And we have Antifa, anti-fascists. And they accuse Trump of this. Well, let's take a look at what the Merriam-Webster's dictionary says about fascism. They define it as a political philosophy, a movement or a regime that exalts nation over the individual and stands for a centralized government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. That's fascism. I don't see Trump doing that. I see Trump removing regulations. I see Antifa in the streets, blocking streets, not letting people go to where they want to go. I see Beto O'Rourke saying, hell yeah, we're going to confiscate your AR-15s. I see Obama saying, you're going to use Common Core. You're going to get fined if you don't buy insurance. And then, yes, the coup de grace, this one. March 6, 2013. The Telegraph. Why we have to have a British paper tell us this and not American papers? You tell me. Here's our beloved Attorney General Eric Holder saying, and I'm quoting the paper here, Barack Obama has the authority to use drone strikes to kill Americans on U.S. soil. Let that sink in. President Barack Obama has the authority to use unmanned drone strikes to kill U.S. citizens on American soil, says the United States Attorney General. I go back to the definition of fascism. Centralized government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic, social. Does any of that stuff that I just listed? Yes, it does. I'm asking a rhetorical question. You know, Ted Cruz being interviewed on Face the Nation, he said, let me tell you something that's deeply concerning. This is when Obama was president. He says, the abuse of power from this administration. That was concerning, deeply concerning. But you know what? Face the Nation, when they did the edits before that went to air, they cut that out because you could not put abuse of power and Obama in the same sentence. You'd be a racist, and they weren't going to let that happen. You see, the elites want control. They don't want to recognize that our rights come from God. They want rights to come from government. All right, let's start wrapping this up. Last year, the Claremont Institute and the Heritage Foundation hosted an hour-long presentation on our Cold War, and they had some people talking about it. One of the people from the audience asked, how likely was it for the Cold War to become a hot war? And one of the panelists very flippantly just kind of blew off the question and said, it's not going to happen. If it happens, it'll start with some militias out west, and the federal government will just shut it right down. And I listened to the way he answered. I'm just kind of shaking my head. I don't think he understands. That was March of 2019. It's about a year ago. Well, in fall of 2019, Ralph Northam, the Virginia governor, he announces he's going to enact gun control legislation aimed at confiscating Virginians' guns. Sounds kind of fascist if you ask me. So what happens? 22 Virginia counties declare themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. We've got a sheriff in Maryland, Mike Lewis, who says that if the federal government tries to strip his citizens of their rights to bear arms, that it'll be an all-out civil war. His words. This is a county sheriff saying this. This elitist attitude is what's going to push and push and push. You don't need to push the founding principles that we espouse as conservatives. You don't need to push that on people. You have to push this elitist view on people. You have these people who think they know better than us. Consider State Senator Richard Saslaw from Virginia, caught on a hot mic, describing Second Amendment supporters as little kids. He says they're like little kids. These elitists do not want us to have the freedom. They want to have the control for themselves. 1770s, Patriots and Loyalists. 2020, Patriots and Globalists. And it's been accelerating for the past decade under Obama. If you want to read more about this, I encourage you to go to uncoverdc.com because I've got a column called Decade of Disdain, Part 2, Our Cold Civil War. And a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about in this podcast, I have links to. You can watch videos and read articles stuff that I've talked about in that column. But let me close up by saying that the elites are not going to stop their march. They really do want global government. It's going to be up to us, if we want to maintain our country, to do one thing, and that's stop compromising. They were making great progress. 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward under Obama. It just started accelerating. No steps back anymore. Which is why when Trump got elected, they all hate Trump. because he stopped their forward progress. They were going to march right on through to global governance. Patriots, it's up to us to stop the elites and not using guns. We just need to say no. They're going to make their wild demands. We're going to say no. They're going to say, we need to compromise, and we need to say no. We need to put our foot down and say, we're not compromising anymore. And so, you know what? I've been rolling around in my head, and then I read in the Free Beacon, and I'm going to quote here the president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, Philip Van Cleve. And he says, and I quote, "We've been down this compromise road, and their version of a compromise is they never give up anything. We are expected to give up something every time, and we're not doing it anymore." Close quote. To that, I say, amen, hear, hear, salute Mr. Van Cleve. That is the mindset that patriots need to have. Stop compromising. This is an election year. I think we need to identify the candidates who are running against the globalists and support them as much as we can if we want to have a country left. That's the mindset we need. No more compromise. Patriots believe that rights come from God, not the government. Patriots believe that political power comes from the will of the governed, that our government should be a representative republic, that our government should have limited power, and that our rights cannot be taken away by the government. I am going to wrap this up by making a very bold statement, and I'm going to tick off some people with this and offend some people, and quite frankly, I don't care. I am convinced, after looking at this run of history that I've just described over the past half hour plus, that patriots believe in the principles that made this country what it is. Loyalists wanted someone else in charge. Globalists want someone else in charge. Patriots want to preserve those principles that I just outlined. So if somebody is going to say that they're a globalist and they don't believe in these principles, they don't believe in political freedom, where we get our power from the will of the governed, that God establishes these rights, not the government. If they don't want to believe that, then they're no longer a patriot. And I'll be happy to say it to their face. You're not even a patriot. You're not a patriot. And they're going to say, how dare you call my patriotism into question? And I'm going to say, I dare just fine. Because you're not supporting the principles upon which our country were founded, right? You are not going to do it. So I'm not going to call you a patriot. You want to support these principles? Then you're a patriot. So yes, I will call your patriotism into question. You want to argue? Argue. But I'm not compromising anymore. I want to encourage everyone listening to this, please encourage everybody else not to compromise anymore. Stand on these principles. Let's get people elected who stand on these principles. There's no reason to force any principles onto people. If you have to do that, then you're a globalist. This is an election year. Let's make it count. With that, I'll wrap up. This is Daniel Bobinski with the New Book of Daniel podcast. You can read more of my stuff on the foundations of our society at uncoverdc.com. You can get a hold of me at newbookofdaniel@outlook.com. Send me an email. If you have any requests, concerns, questions, fire me an email. newbookofdaniel@outlook.com. Track me on Twitter. Go to @newbookofdaniel. If you want to support me, like I said, go to myworkplaceexcellence.com. See how my company can help your company or you as a person. Amen, patriots. Hats off, salutes, stand firm. We can do this. Talk to you in episode number 4. Bye now.